welcome to Zambia at 60. I'm your presenter, Juliet Mutale. Now we are heading towards the commemoration of Independence Day, which falls on the 24th of October 2024. And so today, our very own Zanise staffer, Alice Banda, had the privilege to talk to one of our very own veteran politicians in this country. And this is no other than Vernon Mwanga. Now, Mr. Mwanga gives the details of what Zambia really went through during the independence struggle. Let's watch.
Sir, you're welcome to this interview.
Okay, you're welcome.
We hear you came across KK on one of your visits with one of your relatives. Tell us about that visit and how it went. How you met KK in short.
I first met KK in 1960 at the old Freedom House on Freedom Way in Lusaka, where the headquarters of UNIP was at that time. And I went there because I had made up my mind that I needed to make a contribution to the struggle for independence. So the Secretary General of UNIP at the time was a man called Mainza Chona. And I went to see Mainza Chona, who had been a close family friend of my dad. And I told him that I wanted to meet KK. He said, fine, let me walk you to his office. So we walked across, went to KK's office, and he introduced me to President Kaunda. So I sat down and said, oh, young man, it's good to see you. And so Mainza Chona left, the two of us, to talk. So KK started asking me questions about various things and what was happening on the continent. And I said, no, I've been following these in Ghana, the struggle, and in Guinea, and I know the leaders as well, Kwame Nkrumah and Ahmed Sekou Toure in Guinea. And KK turned around to me and said, how does a young man your age get to know about things like that? I said, well, my dad made sure that I'm informed about this thing. My dad was a teacher, headmaster of the only black upper primary school for Africans in Livingstone, called Shungu. And Mr. Mainza Chona then was working in Livingstone. I remember his official title, that's before he went to study law in the UK. His official position in the High Court was African clerk stroke High Court interpreter. So he used to come to my dad's house quite a lot because later on my dad became president of the Northern Rhodesia African Teachers Association. And Mainza Chona was a very regular visitor. Almost every week he used to visit my parents, and I would interact with him first. So we started talking with KK. He said, well, I've never met a young man who is as knowledgeable as you are about what's happening in the world. I'm really amazed, I'm surprised. I'm told you want to join the struggle. I said, yes. Why have you chosen UNIP and not ANC? I said, well, because UNIP represents what I believe in. UNIP is more aggressive in confronting colonialism, and I found ANC a little more on the passive side, and I don't think I would fit into their setup. So that is why I've decided. He says, you come from a well-to-do family. Do you realize that in the struggle, there is nothing that is offered you? KK was telling me. It's not a job where you'll be earning a salary. There will be a lot of difficulties. You probably go without food and without this. I said, yeah, I'm aware of that, and I'm ready for it. That is part of the sacrifice which has to be made in order for our country to gain independence. So we parted. He said, I will see you again, definitely. So I went back to Mainza Chona's office. He said to me, oh, you spent much longer than I thought. I said, yes. He was asking me a lot of questions, and I was answering. And so he said, are you really sure that you want to join the struggle? I said, yes. On a full-time basis, I said, yes. And so I went away, and I was told to come back the following week. And when I came back, I was told that I'd been appointed by KK as a provincial youth leader, for UNIP in Southern Province. And the headquarters at that time was in Monza. So that is how I started interacting with KK in 1960. So there were 4 of us in the office. Then later on we were joined by one more who was dealing with information and publicity.
Tell us about the struggle for independence during that time. How was it?
Well, it was rough. It was very difficult because, especially operating in a province like Southern Province where I was based, which was predominantly ANC, African National Congress. As good fortune would have it for me, Mr. Harry Nkumbula, who was president of the African National Congress, was a very great friend of my dad. In those days, blacks were not allowed to buy whiskey, to buy gin, brandy, wine, or vodka. You could only buy Lion, Castle, and Chibuku. But they made exception to 3 or 4 blacks in Livingstone, including my dad, who had acquired or reached a certain level of education, who were given special permits by the provincial commissioner to buy whiskey, gin, brandy, if they wanted to. Every year it was renewed. And Mr. Nkumbula, he liked to drink some whiskey, so when he was in Livingstone, he knew that my dad would have some whiskey. Well, that's what my dad used to drink as well. So I used to see him at my dad's house. I would sit and listen to them talking. And each time Mr. Nkumbula left our house, the following day, the police arrived at my dad's house at 4 in the morning and started searching. And they always had a warrant which read, looking for seditious material. And they would search, whatever they wanted to take, they took and went away. So I would ask the neighborhood kids I used to play with next door on both sides of the house, did the police come to your house? They said, no. Did they come to your house? They said, no. So, why do they only come to my dad's house then? So when it happened the second time, I took enough courage to ask my dad what this was all about. So I said, what are you and Uncle Harry doing? Why is it that each time he has been here, the police come here to search? He says, don't worry about that. What your Uncle Harry and I were discussing is that we don't want these white people to continue ruling. Even those policemen who come, the white policemen who come to search, we don't want them. We want local people to be trained to do that job. We're fighting for your generation to be able to govern this country. That's what it's all about. They can come and search here 1,000,000 times. I will not change my position. So my dad said. I said, So I began to understand what this was all about. And that is how slowly I started taking interest in the struggle. You couldn't enter departmental shops. You had to buy through the window. You couldn't enter a chemist. You had to buy through a window. You couldn't enter a butchery. You had to buy meat through a window, a side window. You couldn't enter hotels. Hotels like Ridgeway Hotel, Osaka Hotel, Savoy Hotel, Edinburgh. You couldn't enter those hotels. There was a sign, Africans and dogs not allowed. So it's life was hard. Blacks had their own education system, their own schools. The whites had their own. The whites had, even on the train, the railway train, the blacks had their own compartments, whites had their own compartments. That's how bad the situation was. Health facilities were also segregated. At the University Teaching Hospital, UTH now, at that time it was not called UTH, by the way, because UTH is the name we gave it only much after independence. It was called Lusaka Central Hospital. It was divided. The whites, where the pediatric section is now, that was the white wing of the hospital. The blacks were on the other side. All those big buildings were not there. They were only put up after independence. Residential accommodation, for example, if you take Lusaka, it was also segregated. Blacks used to live in Matero, Chilenje, and Kabwata, those round huts, thatched houses. They left a few when they demolished them just for historical, cultural purposes. The English whites, they used to live in Kabulonga, Sunningdale, Woodlands, Northmead, Rhodes Park, but those were very small areas. Most of the non-English whites used to live in Roma. That's why it's called Roma. Roma is Rome, as you know, which is the capital of Italy. So that's where they used to live. That's how bad the situation was. So it was really, the situation was very bad. We, the owners of the country, if you were found in a white residential area, like Kabulonga, walking on the street by the police, they asked you, what are you doing here? If you didn't produce a document to show that you were employed by one of the whites who lived there,
You're trespassing.
you were arrested for trespass,
Oh, God.
loitering, and trespass.
Okay.
That's how bad things were. So, and given those circumstances, I just thought, no, it's necessary for me to join the struggle, those who are fighting for our freedom, because we cannot continue to tolerate this kind of discrimination against us in our own country.
Then you had completed grade 12?
Yes.
You had done your university or college?
No, not yet. I decided that those issues would be looked into afterwards, which is what I did. So I decided that it was time to join the struggle. You'll be interested to know that at the time of independence, we had 108 university graduates only in the country, and 1,200 holders of school certificates, or Cambridge, if you like, grade 12 now. Only in the country. That is why during the struggle in UNIP, we prioritized education. We sponsored a lot of students to study in India, in Yugoslavia, in Czechoslovakia, as it was then called, in East Germany, in Sweden, in West Germany, in Soviet Union, in the United States, to get them prepared, to prepare for us after independence so that they could come and work for their country. That's how bad things were.
So what was your next post after the Monze youth post that you were given?
After the Monze Youth Post, in 1961, there was a UNIP conference at Mulungushi Rock. And we had formed within UNIP a small group of young radicals, what we called then the Casablanca Group.
Why Casablanca?
We called it Casablanca Group because at that time, the Organization of African Unity, OAU, had not yet been formed. It was formed only in 1963. There were two informal organizations which existed, very informal. One was called the Casablanca Group, which was the radical part of the African continent. The conservative part was called the Monrovia Group. So we were nicknamed the Casablanca Group because of our radical views and the fact that we wanted colonialism confronted more radically than was happening up to that point. So when we got to Mulungushi Rock, the Casablanca Group decided that no, we have to press our leaders to accept that there should be what we described then as a master plan. A master plan. In Vernacular we called it chachacha. We still have roads named after Chachacha Road. That road came from there at that time. And that we wanted a more radical confrontation with colonialism.
Which included doing things like...
Well, unfortunately, included doing things that would not be considered very pleasant in polite society. And you can imagine how difficult it was to convince our president, KK, to accept a plan of that nature, because KK essentially was a Mahatma Gandhi believer, follower of Mahatma Gandhi, non-violence. We didn't all share that concept when it came to colonialism, because we felt that when we got to meetings sometime, the colonialists come, they start attacking people, tear gas. Why should we be non-violent? That we needed to be a lot more active. Active is a very mild word, but I have to use it for purposes of this it. And so we decided that we were going to press for a master plan, which would include having to attack a number of institutions. So when we got to Mulungushi, the Central Committee had decided that there should be no elections for members of the Central Committee. And that because there was this master plan which was being launched, we should take the leadership as it was. And we said, no, we don't accept that. And I remember Mr. Solomon Kalulu, I'm sure you know some of his children, including the one who was permanent secretary, Christo Kalulu. He was the national chairman of UNIP. He said, well, this is the decision which has been made. A few members of the Casablanca group, Alex Chikwanda and myself, we went onto the platform. We grabbed the microphone and we said, we want elections. We can't go into the master plan, some of the leadership that we've seen here. We need to introduce new people. So, do you want elections? And there are people in thousands. Yes! So we say, So, elections. So there was an adjournment, the Central Committee met for a bit, then they came back and said, well, it would appear that the consensus is that there should be an election. We said, yes, we want an election. Finally, an election was held, and some of the leaders who were in leadership were dropped. The new ones were elected and put in those positions. And after that master plan had been adopted, in 1961, we went to our respective places and to start now the activism.
What roles did Zambia play in liberating other nations in terms of independence?
Well, we played a very major role. When the time was right, we initiated talks because attempts were made by some of these colonial powers to get us to negotiate on behalf of the people of these respective countries. And we couldn't do that because that was not our mandate. What we wanted was to have the leaders released from detention, prisons, so that they could negotiate on behalf of their own people, not us. We had no mandate to negotiate on behalf of them. We said we could not do that. So we supported the struggle from here at very high costs. There were times, for example, you have heard of a place called Chikumbi. The Chikumbi camps were bombed by the Smith regime, and hundreds of people were injured, and a number of people were killed. It was even the ambulances could not manage to bring people to UTH. We had to appeal to citizens to surrender their trucks and minibuses to help bring in people who are injured to UTH. And Zambians surrendered their vehicles, offered to help, and they did help to bring these people to the University Teaching Hospital after it had been renamed at that time. And you won't believe what else happened. The doctors ran out of blood. The blood bank ran out of blood to carry out some of the operations which needed to be carried out to save lives. And I had to go on radio to appeal to people to go and donate blood. Over 2,000 people volunteered to go and give. They went to UTH to donate blood to enable doctors to do. This is part of what we went through, and that is how supportive the people were of the struggle. So we paid for, we looked after their accommodation, their trips abroad, paying for their electricity, water, everything. We did everything in addition to supporting them, and also supporting those who were coming out of their respective countries to go and train militarily, to go back and liberate their countries, overthrow the colonial regimes. They passed through here, and we faced the consequences of bombings on our borders in Lusaka. It was awful. It was absolutely awful. And I remember each time there was an issue, Oliver Tambo, who was president of the ANC and who was based here, we would rescue, we would get him, the security get him, and they bring him to my house without even his colleagues knowing, which he used as a safe house. And he would stay in my house sometime, depending on the atmosphere outside. A week, he's staying there, no one allowed to go to see him, just to safeguard the leaders and to make sure that the leaders were there to provide direction. They had issues, yes, from time to time, but we supported the struggle wholeheartedly as Zambia. And without the support that we gave the struggle, not just in terms of supporting the armed struggle, but also of supporting the negotiating process when the time was right, they wouldn't have been able to get to where they did in the time that they did. And I think that a lot of them still appreciate what we've done. And that is why, for example, when I go to places like Namibia, I'm treated more or less like a king, because we made a lot of, we did a lot of it. In the case of Namibia, I, on behalf of Zambia, took the question of Southwest Africa to the UN Security Council and persuaded the UN Security Council to refer that Southwest Africa question to the International Court of Justice at The Hague to rule that South Africa's presence in Southwest Africa was illegal. The matter went to court, International Court, 1970. The judgment came in July, I think, 1971, they ruled in our favor, that South Africa's presence was indeed illegal, and that they should withdraw from Southwest Africa. And that paved the way for Resolution 435, which eventually led to the independence of Namibia. So we did a lot for Zimbabwe. The Zimbabwe Constitutional Conference was agreed here in Zambia. During the Commonwealth Conference, at a meeting between President Kaunda, President Nyerere of Tanzania, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher of the United Kingdom, they met here and agreed that there will be a constitutional conference to discuss the future of Zimbabwe. That was 1979. And the conference was held. Elections were held in 1980, and that's how Mugabe ended up becoming Prime Minister in 1980. Moved towards terminating the struggle and assuming independence. So in the case of Angola, we are the ones who persuaded the Portuguese here in Lusaka. Mario Soares, who was foreign minister, later became prime minister of Portugal. We invited him to come. He came here and we told him independence is the only thing we could accept for Angola and Mozambique. And he was appointed foreign minister by the armed forces movement in Portugal, which had overthrown the regime of Salazar and his colleagues and assumed power. And they wanted what they called overseas territories to be freed. There was a time when we used to listen to Radio Mozambique. They used to have very interesting programs. And they would say, this is Radio Mozambique, Portugal. They had to mention Portugal. Yes. Lorenzo Marx Radio, Portugal, Mozambique. I mean, that's how far colonialism had gone. They regarded Angola and Mozambique as provinces, overseas provinces of Portugal. That is exactly what was happening. So we persuaded them, no, independence. And the independence talks for Mozambique were held here. We hosted them. And I hosted Mario Soares and the Armed Forces Movement representatives, General Carvalho and the others, here in Lusaka. And it was agreed, the dates agreed. We even gave a plan to Joaquim Chissano to go to Mozambique to become Prime Minister before his boss, the substantive president, assumed office. So there is nothing we held back for them. It was costly for us, but we were committed to the struggle because it was our view then, and the view of President Kaunda, who was the one who attended the first OAU summit in Addis Ababa, 1963, and addressed the heads of state. He told them that after we got independence, we would support the struggle of the neighboring countries until independence was achieved, and that we would support the struggle of Africans anywhere on the continent until the entire African soil was liberated. And we were made to fulfill that promise.
So talking about the struggle, since we are still talking about the independence struggle, Zambia helped quite a number of countries to attain get independence.
Mm-hmm.
Which countries in Africa helped Zambia get independence?
Mm-hmm. We got a lot of assistance, support from Tanzania, Mwalimu Nyerere, from Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, and we got support from Ahmed Sekou Toure, who was president of Guinea, the Republic of Guinea. We got support from Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the president of Egypt. we got a lot of support from Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia at the time. So we were also given assistance, we were given support by a number of African countries. It was only fair that we should reciprocate that support by supporting other liberation movements after we gained independence.
Last but not the least, how should Zambians celebrate 60 years of independence?
Well, to celebrate and recognize and acknowledge those who made contributions, those who sacrificed their lives, sacrificed their education. I sacrificed my youth to the struggle.
Yes.
And also to remember those who lost their lives during the struggle, or even after the struggle. As misfortune would have it, in Zambia we have not yet come to a stage where we seem to recognize and support freedom fighters like they do in other countries, like in Tanzania or Mozambique, in Angola or in South Africa. And I think that we're getting 60 years is a long time. People sacrificed for this independence, they lost their lives, some of them became disabled for life, some of them went to jail, we tested jail. It's time for us to remember those people as we celebrate 60 years. We have to remember those who sacrificed for our independence, for us to be where we are today. And that is why I always say to people and members of my family, and I've got 4 generations in my family. I've got my oldest grandchild is 41, my oldest great-grandchild is 19, so we have 4 generations. I always say to them, I have had the best. They can have the rest.
Well, viewers, on that note, we come to the close of this special interview where we featured Honorable Vernon Mwanga from his residence right here in Olympia.
Interesting interview there. Interesting to see how the many Zambians were really fighting for the liberation of this country. You see there in Chikumbi area, after being bombed, how many people were injured in trying to fight for this country, in an effort to fight for this nation. Well, so interesting indeed. And lastly, we see Mr. Mwanga there talking about really appealing to the many Zambians that as we commemorate this year's Independence Day, let us put in mind that a lot of people shed their blood for this country. A lot of people fought for the independence of this country. We've come to the end of Zambia at 60. My name is Juliet Ntele saying bye-bye and God bless.
Where we take on, where we name, when we watch our love.